December 8, 1941. Dawn breaks over the South China Sea. At 15,000 feet, the sky is calm, pale blue, almost peaceful. The only sound inside the cockpit of the sleek Mitsubishi fighter is the steady roar of the engine and the occasional crackle of radio chatter in Japanese. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's rising fighter aces, scans the horizon. Then he sees them, American aircraft, slow, scattered, climbing clumsily through the morning sky near Clark Field in the Philippines. Sakai tilts his wings slightly, signaling the attack. What follows takes only minutes. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero dives like a falcon, fast, agile, almost effortless in the air. American pilots scramble to respond, but their aircraft, P-40 Warhawks and P-36 Hawks, turn slower, climb slower. Machine guns flash. One American fighter spirals downward in flames. Another tries to evade but stalls in a desperate turn. Inside Japanese cockpits, pilots exchange confident remarks over the radio. The Americans fight bravely, but they fight poorly. To the Japanese aviators watching them struggle, the conclusion seems obvious. American pilots simply aren't well trained. And in those early months of the war, the evidence appears to prove it. Across the Pacific, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service is one of the most elite flying forces on Earth. Its pilots are not ordinary recruits. They are survivors. Before a cadet ever reaches a combat aircraft, he endures years of brutal training, physical punishment, relentless drills, and a ruthless elimination process. Out of every 100 applicants, sometimes fewer than 10 graduate. Those who do become masters of aerial combat. Many of them have already spent years fighting over China, honing their skills in real combat long before the war against the United States began. By 1941, Japan's fighter units are filled with veterans. Pilots like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, and Tetsuzo Iwamoto. Men who can perform impossible maneuvers in the fragile but deadly Zero fighter. Men who have spent thousands of hours in the air. Against them, the Americans seem amateurish. The U.S. military, after all, entered the war suddenly, unprepared, shocked by the attack on Pearl Harbor. American pilots are often rushed through training programs that barely prepare them for the brutal reality of aerial combat. Many have never fired their guns in combat before. Some have never even seen an enemy aircraft until the moment bullets begin flying, and the Japanese notice. February 1942. Over the skies of Java, Japanese fighters intercept a group of American bombers escorted by inexperienced Allied fighters. The battle is short and brutal. Zeros slice through the formation with surgical precision. Bombers fall. Escorts scatter. For the Japanese pilots, these encounters begin to feel routine, predictable, almost easy. After one such mission, veteran pilots gather in the humid evening air of their airfield. The smell of oil and tropical rain hangs heavy over the runway. A young pilot laughs as he recalls the battle. The Americans fly like students, he jokes. Others nod. To them, the Americans lack the discipline, the instinct, the fluid teamwork that Japanese pilots have perfected. The conclusion spreads quietly through Japanese squadrons across the Pacific. American pilots simply cannot match them. Not in skill, not in experience, and certainly not in courage. But what the Japanese pilots cannot see, not yet, is what's happening thousands of miles away. Back in the United States, the shock of Pearl Harbor has triggered something enormous. Factories roar to life. Shipyards glow through the night. And quietly, across airfields scattered from Texas to California, something else begins to grow. Something the Japanese commanders never imagined. A machine, not made of steel or engines, but of people. Young men arriving by the thousands. Farm boys, college students, factory workers. They step off trains carrying small suitcases and enormous expectations. Each one wants to become a pilot. Each one wants revenge. At first, the numbers seem absurd. In 1941, the United States trains only a few hundred military pilots each year. Now, the government plans something unprecedented. Tens of thousands. Every year, across the country, new airfields appear almost overnight. Runways carved from farmland. Training aircraft lined up in endless rows. Instructors shouting over roaring engines. Cadets sweating in the cockpit of PT-17 Stearman trainers. The program is massive, industrial, relentless, and unlike Japan's elite but tiny training pipeline, the American system is designed for one purpose above all: scale. If one pilot falls, another takes his place, and another, and another. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japanese pilots continue their victories. Spring 1942. Over New Guinea, Japanese fighters sweep the skies once again. American aircraft fall back. Pilots struggle against the superior maneuverability of the Zero. And once again, Japanese veterans laugh at the enemy. They see the same mistakes, the same clumsy turns, the same panic under pressure. But slowly, almost invisibly, something begins to change. The American pilots appearing in the skies of the Pacific are no longer quite the same. Their formations are tighter, their tactics smarter. They dive faster, climb harder, fight differently. At first, the Japanese veterans dismiss it. Coincidence, luck. But somewhere far away, the giant training machine in the United States is accelerating. By the end of 1942, America will train over 10,000 new pilots. And the number is only going to grow. Soon, the skies of the Pacific will begin to fill with them. Young, aggressive, and increasingly dangerous. The Japanese aces don't know it yet, but the balance in the sky is about to shift. And when it does, some of the most famous fighter pilots in Japan will begin to disappear, one by one, without warning. Spring 1942. Primary Flight School, Lubbock Army Airfield, Texas. The sun rises over endless flat land, turning the sky a deep orange. Engines cough to life across the runway as a line of yellow PT-17 Stearman biplanes begins to move. Inside one cockpit, aviation cadet Robert DeHaven grips the control stick with sweaty gloves. The open cockpit blasts warm air across his goggles. His instructor sits behind him, calm, watching every movement. "Keep the nose steady," the instructor shouts over the engine. The Stearman rolls down the runway. For DeHaven, this is only his third flight. But across the airfield, dozens of other aircraft are already climbing. And across the United States, hundreds of airfields just like this are doing the same thing. Because after Pearl Harbor, America realized something terrifying. The United States didn't just need airplanes. It needed pilots. Thousands of them. Fast. Before the war, American military aviation was tiny. In 1939, the entire U.S. Army Air Corps trained only about 800 pilots per year. Japan, by contrast, trained elite aviators through a brutal selection system that produced only the best. But very few. The Americans would solve the problem differently. They would build a pilot factory. By 1942, the United States launched the largest aviation training program in history. New airfields appeared across Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, California, Florida. Even small rural towns suddenly found themselves hosting military bases. The program was divided into stages. First came primary flight training. Cadets flew the slow, forgiving PT-17 Stearman biplane. Here they learned the basics: takeoff, landing, stalls, spins. Many washed out immediately. Flying looked easy from the ground. In the cockpit, it was something else entirely. Engines failed. Students panicked. Aircraft flipped during bad landings. Training accidents were common. But the program moved forward relentlessly. Because unlike Japan's system, the American one expected losses. The goal was simple: train as many competent pilots as possible. Those who survived primary training advanced to basic flight training. Now they flew faster aircraft like the Vultee BT-13 Valiant. The skies above American training fields became crowded with formations of cadets practicing combat maneuvers, diving attacks, formation flying, emergency landings. Instructors pushed them harder every day, not to create perfect pilots, but to create combat-ready ones. Finally came advanced training. Cadets were split into specialties. Fighter pilots trained on aircraft like the A6M Texan, learning high-speed combat maneuvers and aerial gunnery. Bombers and transport pilots trained on larger twin-engine aircraft. By the time a cadet earned his silver wings, he had spent 200 to 300 hours in the air. It wasn't as brutal or selective as Japan's system, but it had one overwhelming advantage: numbers. By 1943, the United States was producing more than 60,000 pilots per year. It was a scale that stunned even American commanders. New pilots arrived in squadrons faster than the military could deploy them. And many of them were young, very young. Some were barely 19 or 20 years old. Farm boys from Kansas, mechanics from Detroit, college students who had never seen the ocean before being shipped to the Pacific. Yet in the cockpit, something surprising began to emerge. These young pilots were learning quickly. They weren't burdened by old tactics. They were taught new ones, practical ones designed specifically to defeat the Japanese Zero. One of the most important innovations came from a U.S. Navy pilot named Lieutenant Commander John Thatch. Thatch had studied the Zero's strengths carefully. The Japanese fighter was incredibly maneuverable, but it had weaknesses. It lacked armor. Its fuel tanks were vulnerable, and in high-speed dives it struggled to keep up with heavier American aircraft. Thatch developed a defensive maneuver called the Thatch Weave. Two fighters flew side by side. If a Japanese Zero attacked one plane from behind, the two American fighters would turn toward each other, crossing paths, forcing the attacking Zero directly into the guns of the other aircraft. Simple, brilliant, deadly. These tactics began spreading through American training programs. Pilots practiced them again and again until they became instinct. Young pilots arriving in the Pacific were no longer improvising. They were trained specifically to fight Japanese aircraft. And slowly, the results began to show. Mid-1942, the Battle of the Coral Sea. For the first time in the war, American and Japanese carrier aircraft clash in massive aerial battles. Japanese pilots still dominate many dogfights. Their experience is unmatched. But American pilots begin showing something new: discipline, coordination. They fight in pairs. They cover each other. They use altitude and speed instead of trying to outturn the Zero. Japanese aces notice it, but they still aren't worried, because in those early battles, Japan still holds the advantage. Its pilots are veterans, men with years of combat behind them. Men like Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, nicknamed the Devil, one of the greatest fighter aces Japan will ever produce. Nishizawa's reputation spreads across the Pacific. He performs impossible aerobatic maneuvers in the Zero. He destroys enemy aircraft with terrifying precision. Some American pilots who encounter him later swear they were fighting a ghost. To the Japanese, he represents everything their training system was designed to create: the perfect fighter pilot. And Japan has many like him, or at least it did, because something is happening in the skies over the Pacific. Something slow at first, almost invisible. The American pilots arriving now are not the same as those early months of the war. They fly better, fight smarter, survive longer. And with every battle, Japanese veterans are beginning to vanish. At first it's one, then another, and another. Soon, even the legendary aces will realize something terrifying. The Americans are not just improving, they are multiplying. And Japan cannot replace the men it is losing. June 4, 1942. high above the Pacific Ocean, near a small, nearly invisible island called Midway. The sky is already filled with smoke. Japanese carrier aircraft circle overhead, while anti-aircraft shells burst like black flowers around them. The battle below is chaotic, ships maneuvering, guns firing, dive bombers screaming toward their targets. Inside the cockpit of a Mitsubishi A6M Zero, Petty Officer, First Class Hiroyoshi Nishizawa scans the sky. Enemy fighters are climbing toward the formation. American aircraft. Nishizawa pushes the throttle forward and banks sharply. The Zero responds instantly, gliding into a tight turn that few other fighters in the world could match. He expects the usual. American pilots trying desperately to turn with him, trying and failing. But this time something is different. The American fighters don't follow him into the turn. Instead, they dive. Fast. Too fast. Nishizawa watches as the American F-4F Wildcat fighters plunge downward, building speed before climbing again from a different direction. They attack in pairs, covering each other, not chasing, not panicking. They're fighting carefully. And for the first time since the war began, Japanese pilots begin noticing a change in the air. The Battle of Midway becomes one of the most important turning points of the Pacific War. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, are destroyed. But something else is happening above the burning ships. The skies are claiming experienced Japanese pilots, carrier aviators, men who took years to train. Some die when their aircraft are shot down. Others die when their carriers sink beneath them. And unlike the Americans, Japan cannot easily replace them. Each loss is permanent. In the months that follow, the air war shifts south to the jungles and islands of the Solomon Islands. Here, a brutal new campaign begins around a remote airstrip on Guadalcanal. American forces call it Henderson Field. Every day, American aircraft take off from the dusty runway to intercept Japanese bombers arriving from distant bases. The battles become known as the Cactus Air Force missions. The sky above Guadalcanal becomes a daily battlefield, and slowly, the Americans begin improving. At first, Japanese pilots still dominate individual dogfights. The Zero remains one of the most maneuverable fighters in the world. But the Americans are adapting. The F-4F Wildcat is slower in turns, but tougher. It has armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and heavy machine guns. American pilots learn to use altitude and diving speed instead of turning battles. They attack, then climb away, then attack again. It isn't graceful, but it works. One afternoon in October 1942, a group of Japanese bombers approaches Guadalcanal, escorted by veteran Zero pilots. Among them is Saburo Sakai, already famous for his combat victories. Sakai spots American fighters climbing to intercept. He dives to engage. The first American pilot tries to turn with him. Sakai shoots him down easily. But then something unusual happens. 2 more American fighters arrive together. They approach carefully. One attacks. The other stays behind, covering. When Sakai turns toward one aircraft, the other lines up a shot. He narrowly escapes. For the first time in months, Sakai finds himself under real pressure. The Americans are not flying like beginners anymore. They're fighting like a team. These encounters become more frequent. Japanese pilots begin reporting something new in their combat reports. American pilots are getting better, much better. They are disciplined. They stay in formation. They refuse to fight on Japanese terms. Instead of chasing the agile Zero into tight turns, they fight using speed, teamwork, and firepower. For Japanese veterans accustomed to dominating the skies, the change is unsettling. But the deeper problem is something else entirely. The Japanese pilot corps is shrinking. Japan's pre-war training system had created elite aviators. But it was painfully slow. It could take 5 years to produce a fully trained naval pilot. Every graduate represented an enormous investment of time and resources. That system worked before the war. But now, pilots are dying faster than they can be replaced. And the replacements arriving at Japanese bases are different. They are younger, less experienced, with fewer training hours. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the American training machine continues expanding. Every month, thousands of new pilots graduate from flight schools. Many of them are immediately sent to combat units. Some die in their first missions, but others survive. And when they survive, they learn quickly. American squadrons now include a mix of experienced veterans and fresh pilots arriving from the training pipeline. The system constantly feeds new aviators into the fight. Japan cannot do the same. By early 1943, Japanese commanders begin noticing something disturbing. Their best pilots are disappearing, not just in isolated battles, but across the entire Pacific. Veteran leaders who once dominated the skies are being killed, wounded, or lost at sea. Some die in combat. Others are shot down during desperate missions to defend shrinking Japanese positions. And with every loss, their squadrons grow weaker, because the pilots replacing them have never fought a real dogfight before. One by one, legendary names begin vanishing from Japanese air units. Veterans who had once terrified Allied pilots. Men who had once mocked American training. Now they are gone, shot down, missing, or buried beneath the ocean. But the most shocking moment is still coming, because soon even one of Japan's greatest aces will fall. And when he does, Japanese pilots across the Pacific will finally understand something terrifying. The Americans are no longer learning. They have already learned. And now they are winning. October 1944. Clark Field, Luzon, Philippines. The humid morning air hangs heavy over the runway. Mechanics move quietly between rows of aircraft, while ground crews load ammunition belts into the wings of waiting fighters. One pilot walks calmly toward his plane. He is thin, quiet, focused. His name is Chief Petty Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa. Among Japanese pilots, the name carries enormous weight. Some call him the devil. Others simply call him the best fighter pilot Japan has ever produced. By now, Nishizawa has flown hundreds of combat missions. His aircraft, usually a Mitsubishi A6M Zero, has tangled with nearly every type of Allied fighter in the Pacific. American pilots who encountered him later said the same thing. He flew like no one else. Aggressive, fearless, unpredictable. But on this morning, something unusual happens. Nishizawa does not climb into a fighter. Instead, he boards a transport aircraft. He has been ordered to travel to another base. Moments later, the plane lifts into the sky. It never reaches its destination. American F-6F Hellcat fighters intercept the transport and shoot it down over the Philippine Sea. Japan's greatest ace is gone, and he never even fired a shot. News of Nishizawa's death spreads quickly through Japanese squadrons. The reaction is quiet, heavy, because by 1944, losses like this are becoming common. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the war with one of the most skilled pilot corps in the world. But 3 years of relentless fighting have taken their toll. The Pacific Ocean has become a graveyard for Japan's best aviators. Some were lost during the desperate battles around Guadalcanal. Others vanished during the brutal carrier clashes in the Philippine Sea. Still others simply failed to return from long-range escort missions. Every loss weakened the backbone of Japanese air power. And unlike the Americans, Japan could not easily replace them. The difference between the two nations had become painfully clear. Japan trained elite pilots slowly. America trained good pilots quickly. And now the numbers were beginning to matter. June 19, 1944. High above the Philippine Sea, hundreds of Japanese aircraft launch from carriers and island bases, flying toward the approaching American fleet. Many of the pilots inside those cockpits are young, very young. Some have only 100 hours of flight training. A few have never fired their guns in real combat. They are replacing the veterans who died in earlier battles. Across the ocean below them, the American fleet waits, and above it, hundreds of fighters rise to meet them. Sleek, powerful F-6F Hellcats roar into the sky from American carriers. The pilots flying them are different from the Americans of 1942. Many are now veterans. Some have already flown dozens of combat missions. Others are fresh from the massive American training pipeline. But even the rookies have something the Japanese pilots no longer possess: preparation, teamwork, numbers. The battle that follows becomes known among American pilots by a strange nickname: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The phrase sounds almost humorous, but for Japanese aviation, it is catastrophic. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft flies toward the American fleet, and wave after wave is intercepted. Hellcats dive through Japanese formations, their 6.50 caliber machine guns tearing through fragile Zero fighters. American radar directs the intercepts with deadly efficiency. Japanese formations break apart under the pressure. Many inexperienced pilots panic. Some forget their training entirely. Others simply try to escape. But the Hellcats are faster, heavier, deadlier. By the end of the battle, over 300 Japanese aircraft have been destroyed. Many of them never even reach the American fleet. They are shot down before they can attack. For American pilots watching enemy aircraft fall from the sky, the battle feels strangely easy. But for Japanese commanders, the reality is horrifying. They have lost not only aircraft, but the last core of trained naval aviators they still possessed. Back on surviving Japanese carriers, commanders study the casualty lists. Entire squadrons have vanished. Pilots who took years to train are gone in a single afternoon, and the replacements waiting back home are barely trained at all. The old Japanese aviation system, the one that produced legendary aces like Saburo Sakai, Tetsuzo Iwamoto, and Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, is collapsing. There simply isn't enough time to train new pilots the old way. Japan tries to speed up training. Courses are shortened, standards lowered, cadets graduate faster, but the result is predictable. New pilots arrive at the front lines with half the experience of the veterans they replace, and they are flying into a sky that now belongs to the Americans. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the American training machine keeps running. Every year, tens of thousands of new pilots graduate. Aircraft production explodes. New fighters appear, faster, tougher, more powerful. The F-6F Hellcat, the P-38 Lightning, the P-51 Mustang, each one designed to dominate the skies, each one flown by pilots who now train with the expectation of fighting Japanese aircraft specifically. For the young American aviators arriving in the Pacific, the situation is almost a reverse of 1942. Now, it is the Japanese who struggle to keep up. Japanese pilots who once mocked American training now face an uncomfortable truth. The Americans have learned, and the men teaching them are often veterans who survived the early years of the war. The lessons of every dogfight have been passed forward, refined, improved, repeated, again and again. By late 1944, Japanese pilots entering combat face a nightmare scenario. They are inexperienced, poorly trained, flying aircraft that are increasingly outclassed, against opponents who are more numerous, better coordinated, and often far more experienced. The balance of the Pacific sky has completely reversed. But the most desperate decision Japan will make is still ahead. Because when a nation runs out of trained pilots, it sometimes turns to something else, something far darker. October 25, 1944. Just after sunrise, the skies above the Philippine Sea glow pale orange as the first Japanese aircraft lifts off from a small airfield on Luzon. Inside the cockpit sits a young pilot. His hands are steady on the controls. But he knows something no pilot in history had ever been ordered to accept before. He is not expected to return. The aircraft climbs slowly. Below him, waves roll endlessly across the Pacific. Ahead, somewhere over the horizon, an enormous American fleet is approaching the Philippines. Dozens of carriers, hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft. For Japan's exhausted air force, defeating such a force through conventional combat is no longer possible. Too many veteran pilots are gone. Too many aircraft have been destroyed. And the replacements arriving at Japanese air bases are barely trained at all. The Imperial Navy now faces a terrifying reality. There are no experienced pilots left to fight the war the old way. So Japan chooses something else. A new tactic. One built not on survival, but sacrifice. The program is called Tokubetsu Kogekitai, Special Attack Units. But the world would remember them by a different name. Kamikaze, divine wind. The term comes from ancient Japanese history, the storms that once destroyed Mongol invasion fleets centuries earlier. Now Japan hopes that human pilots will become that storm. Inside Japanese air bases across the Philippines, young aviators gather in briefing rooms. Many of them have barely finished their flight training. Some have only flown solo a handful of times. But they are told the mission clearly. Take off. Find an American warship. Crash directly into it. Their aircraft are loaded with bombs. Fuel tanks full. There is no plan for landing. No plan for survival. Only impact. The first major kamikaze attacks strike the American fleet during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. American radar operators watch blips approaching on their screens. At first it looks like another ordinary air attack. But when American fighters intercept the Japanese planes, something strange happens. The enemy pilots do not evade. They do not break formation. They do not try to escape. Instead, they dive straight toward the ships. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. The sky fills with explosions. Some aircraft disintegrate before reaching their targets. But others break through. One slams into the escort carrier USS St. Lo. The explosion rips through the ship. Moments later, the carrier erupts in a massive fireball. She sinks within an hour. For American sailors watching from nearby ships, the attack is shocking. Not just because of the damage, but because of what it represents. These pilots never intended to survive. For Japan, the kamikaze program is born out of desperation. By 1944, the country's once elite pilot corps is almost gone. Years of brutal combat have erased the veterans who dominated the skies early in the war. The replacements simply cannot compete against American fighters like the F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair. Even when Japanese pilots reach American ships, they are usually shot down before dropping their bombs. Kamikaze attacks change the equation. A crashing aircraft becomes the weapon itself. It requires far less training. A pilot only needs to fly straight once. Across the Pacific, American pilots begin encountering these attacks regularly. Young fighter pilots launched from aircraft carriers now face a new kind of enemy. An enemy who refuses to retreat, refuses to surrender, and sometimes refuses even to dodge incoming fire. The sky above American fleets becomes a place of constant tension. Radar blips appear. Fighters scramble. Every approaching aircraft might be on a suicide mission. But even kamikaze attacks cannot reverse the larger reality of the war. Because while Japan is turning to suicide tactics, America's training machine is still running. Relentlessly. Back in the United States, new pilots continue graduating from flight schools. The process that began in 1942 has now reached enormous scale. Thousands of cadets train every month. They fly trainers, practice gunnery, study combat tactics refined from years of real battlefield experience. Many of their instructors are veterans who survived the brutal early years of the Pacific War. Men who once faced Japanese aces in the skies over Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Now those veterans pass their knowledge to a new generation. Every lesson learned in combat becomes part of the training system. Every mistake becomes a correction. The American pilot factory is no longer just producing aviators. It is producing experienced ones faster than any nation in history. By early 1945, the difference in the skies is undeniable. American fighter groups patrol over Japan itself. Young American pilots, some barely old enough to drink, now dominate the airspace above the enemy homeland. Below them, Japanese air defenses struggle to respond. There simply are not enough trained pilots left to fight back. The once feared Japanese fighter force has nearly vanished. For the surviving veterans like Saburo Sakai, the transformation is almost unbelievable. At the start of the war, Japanese pilots mocked American training. They believed American aviators were soft, inexperienced, unprepared for real combat. And in 1941, they were partly right. But the Americans changed. They learned. And they built something Japan never expected. A system capable of replacing every loss. Again, and again, and again, until the sky itself belonged to them. But the full realization of what happened would only come later, after the war ended, when surviving Japanese pilots began comparing the numbers and discovered the scale of what they had been fighting. September 1945, a quiet interrogation room inside a U.S. military facility in Yokosuka, Japan. The war is over. Outside the window, the harbor is filled with American ships, destroyers, carriers, transports, stretching across the water like an endless steel horizon. Inside the room sits a former Japanese naval aviator. His uniform is worn, the rank insignia faded. Across the table from him sits an American intelligence officer with a notepad. The questions are simple. What tactics did Japanese pilots use? How were they trained? What went wrong? At first, the pilot answers cautiously, but eventually the conversation reaches something deeper, something that many Japanese aviators had only begun to understand during the final months of the war: the scale of what they had been fighting. Before the war, Japan believed its aviation system was superior. In many ways, it was. The Imperial Japanese Navy had created one of the most demanding pilot training programs in the world. Cadets endured years of brutal instruction, endless drills, strict discipline. Out of hundreds of applicants, only a handful became fighter pilots. Those who graduated were extraordinary. They were experts in aerial combat long before many American pilots had even entered a cockpit. That system produced legends. Pilots like Saburo Sakai, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Tetsuzo Iwamoto, and others whose skill terrified Allied pilots early in the war. But the system had a fatal weakness. It produced too few pilots. Across the ocean, the United States had approached the problem differently. American planners understood something simple but powerful. In a long war, survival would depend on replacement. So instead of building an elite system designed to produce perfect pilots, they built an industrial system designed to produce thousands of competent ones. Airfields multiplied across the country. Training aircraft rolled off production lines. Civilian flight schools were converted into military academies. Instructors developed standardized training programs that could be repeated again and again. The result was unprecedented. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States trained over 190,000 military pilots, fighter pilots, bomber crews, transport pilots, naval aviators. It was a number almost impossible to comprehend for Japanese commanders. Japan, by comparison, struggled to replace even a fraction of its early war losses. By the time Japanese leaders realized the imbalance, it was already too late. Their veteran pilots, the core of their air power, had already been lost in battles across the Pacific, Guadalcanal, the Solomon Islands, the Philippine Sea. Each battle had quietly drained the pool of experience Japan depended on. The American system worked differently. Losses were expected. New pilots constantly flowed into combat units. Some died. Some survived long enough to become veterans themselves. And those veterans trained the next wave. The cycle never stopped. By the final year of the war, American fighter groups often contained dozens of experienced pilots who had already fought in multiple campaigns. Meanwhile, many Japanese squadrons were filled with rookies who had barely finished flight training. The difference appeared clearly in the skies. American pilots fought in coordinated formations. They used tactics refined through years of experimentation. They flew aircraft designed to survive combat damage. Machines like the F-6F Hellcat, F-4U Corsair, and P-51 Mustang. Japanese aircraft, once feared for their agility, now faced opponents that were faster, stronger, and heavily armed. And the pilots flying them were increasingly inexperienced. For the Japanese veterans who survived the war, the realization came slowly. At first, they believed American pilots lacked courage. Then they believed American pilots lacked skill. But eventually they understood something else entirely. They were not fighting individual pilots. They were fighting a system that could replace every loss. A system that grew stronger the longer the war continued. Years later, Saburo Sakai, one of the few famous Japanese aces to survive the war, reflected on the early days of the conflict. At first, Japanese pilots believed they were unbeatable. Their training had made them confident, perhaps too confident. But by the later years of the war, Sakai noticed something different when facing American fighters. The pilots flying them were calm, disciplined, dangerous. They were no longer the inexperienced opponents of 1941. They had learned from every battle, and there were always more of them. The Pacific sky that once belonged to Japan had slowly filled with American aircraft. Thousands of them, each flown by a pilot trained through the massive American program that began after Pearl Harbor. For Japan's surviving aviators, the truth became impossible to ignore. They had underestimated their enemy, not because American pilots lacked skill, but because America had built something far more powerful than individual skill. It had built endless replacement. By the end of the war, the transformation was complete. The same nation whose pilots were once mocked in the skies over the Philippines now controlled the air above Japan itself. American fighters escorted bombers across the Japanese homeland. Carrier aircraft roamed the Pacific freely, and Japanese pilots, once the most feared in the world, had almost vanished. The story of the Pacific Air War is often told through famous battles and legendary aircraft. But behind those battles was a quieter truth. Victory did not belong to the nation with the most skilled pilots. It belonged to the nation that could keep producing them again and again and again